On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin.
Hello, I'm Michelle Makori. Thank you for joining us. President Joe Biden's performance in the first presidential debate on Thursday night has sparked concern and criticism from Democrats, as well as speculation that he may be removed from the top of the ticket. There are reports that top members in the Democratic Party and mega donors are now looking at the possibility of swapping him out as the Democratic candidate. Analysts, political players, reporters, and pundits have voiced their concerns following what many described as a very weak performance that only enforced concerns that Biden is not physically and mentally up for the job. John King, CNN's chief national correspondent, said that party strategists, elected officials, and fundraisers are already having conversations about what to do. Democratic strategist David Axelrod and former Obama advisor and CNN commentator Van Jones, just some of the Democrats saying that there will be discussions about whether Biden should remain as the presidential candidate.
There is a deep, a wide, and a very aggressive panic in the Democratic Party. It started minutes into the debate, and it continues right now. It involves party strategists, it involves elected officials, it involves fundraisers. And they're having conversations about the president's performance, which they think was dismal, which they think will hurt other people down the party in the ticket. And they're having conversations about what they should do about it. Some of those conversations include, should we go to the White House and ask the president to step aside? Other of the conversations are about, should prominent Democrats go public with that call?
There is a feeling, I think there was a sense of shock, actually, at how he came out at the beginning of this debate, how his voice sounded. He seemed a little disoriented. He did get stronger as the debate went on, but by that time, I think the panic had set in. And I think you're going to hear discussions that I don't know will lead to anything, but there are going to be discussions about whether he should continue.
But he had a test to meet tonight to restore confidence of the country and of the base, and he failed to do that. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to want to see him consider taking a different course now. We're still far from our convention, and there is time for this party to figure out a different way forward if he will allow us to do that. But that was not what we needed from Joe Biden, and it's personally painful for a lot of people. It's not just panic, it's pain of what we saw tonight.
These are just some of several prominent Democrats calling for a switch, including renowned economist Paul Krugman, who penned an op-ed in the New York Times urging Biden to drop out of the race. He writes, "Given where we are, I must very reluctantly join the chorus asking Biden to voluntarily step aside, with emphasis on the voluntary aspect. Maybe some Biden loyalists will consider this a betrayal, given how much I have supported his policies, but I fear that we need to recognize reality." Biden's campaign came out firing against those calls, saying that the president would absolutely not be dropping out of the race and that he still plans to debate Donald Trump a second time in September. Well, we have a packed power panel to analyze this development, what the likelihood of Biden being replaced is, what's involved in that process, who could replace him, and what would be the reaction and implications for the markets. Joining me today to break this all down is Wendy Patrick, prosecutor and president and founder of BlackSwanVerdicts.com, Richard Roth, Democratic strategist and founder and partner of the Roth law firm, and two of our regulars and fan favorites, Makori, founder of Makori Strategy, and Todd Bubba Horwitz, chief market strategist at BubbaTrading.com. Great to have you all with us. I'm expecting a lot of discussion, a lot of difference of opinion, and tremendous alpha and insight for our viewers. Thank you all for joining us. So we're going to kick it off with just a quick reaction from all of our panelists. And Wendy, you're new to Kitco. Welcome to the show. We're going to start it off with you. And there's a speculation, as we discussed, that following the performance at the debate, President Biden may be replaced. Wendy, what do you make of this?
Had you asked me that, Michelle, 10 minutes after the debate, I would say the likelihood is more than zero, which is not what we thought beforehand. Having seen his performance afterwards, when he's reading off a teleprompter at a rally, I would say that it at least gave some of his supporters something to work with. So it's unlikely today. Now, after the second debate, I probably would say far more likely. But as of this minute, I don't think he'll be replaced.
Bubba, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that he's going to be replaced because he's too selfish to give in and give up the delegates that he has. And it's really up to him if he decides that he wants to drop out of the race. And I don't think he wants to do it. He's never done anything for anybody from a social standpoint. And I think he's too selfish to give it up. So I don't think they're going to replace him whether they want to try or not. I don't think they're going to convince him.
All right, Mike Lee, let's get your take on this quickly.
Yeah, so I don't think he'll be replaced, particularly because he said he was not going to step down today. And then also all of the potential replacements do worse than he does in your Midwest swing states. And like that's why Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee, 4 or 5 years ago, because of his performance in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. And unless, if they had someone by the ready that could do better than him in those states, he wouldn't be the nominee now. So I think they ride it through with him. And then also, who wants to step into this, excrement show against Trump, who was already had a handed lead, or according to Nate Silver, that this wasn't a close race going into the debate.
All right. Well, arguably, other candidates may fare better against Trump. So let's bring in Richard Roth, Democratic strategist. Will he be replaced, and should he be replaced, Richard?
I think those are two very good questions. First of all, the decision is his and only his, Michelle. They can't just involuntarily replace him. He has the delegates, and going into the convention, if he decides, and it's unlikely he will, but if he decides that he is not ready, willing, or able to be the candidate, then he can actually step aside and let the let them fight it out. And I actually agree with Bubba and a bit with Mike. If I firmly believe that if he does withdraw his nomination, I don't think he will, then I think the Democrats will be in far better shape than they are now. Because the one thing that the Republicans are harping in on, which you saw last night, was his age. And his age is definitely a negative. You get a young whippersnapper Democrat who doesn't like Trump, because right now the people that are going to decide this election are the people that don't like either of them. And they're going to say, who do I vote for? Not the Trumpers or the Biden people. So it's interesting. It's very interesting. If he decides to leave, I think the Democrats have a much better shot, but I don't think he's going to decide to step out.
Well, arguably, that does seem to be some of the prevailing sentiments from the Democrats, that should Biden step aside, for all of those people, as Richard pointed out, that it's like lesser of two evils, and anyone but Trump voter will now have a better alternative, who may have been concerned about Joe Biden's age and capacity and capabilities to this point. So, Wendy, if somehow the Democrats decide that they want to do this, talk us through what would actually have to happen at the convention. What would the process be? What does this entail?
Well, those delegates are not under legal obligation to cast their vote a certain way. Now, as a practical matter, it would be horribly awkward if they were to do anything but vote for Joe Biden. However, he has a hand in facilitating this process, both pre and post convention. That is one of the reasons that the conversations now are so important. We don't want to wait till the convention and then have these machinations, largely many of which are untested, because this happens so infrequently. We can only think of a or two other instances where this type of thing was even contemplated. And remember, it's not about him being unpopular, it's about him being unfit. And last night was supposed to be to inure to the benefit of the sitting president, because remember, it was all about showing the American people he's up for 4 more years, not 90 minutes, 4 more years. Now, he's fine at rallies, he's fine reading off of teleprompters, but in terms of actually procedurally making this happen, it gets really complicated, because remember, he already has the delegates. It's not as if we're pre-primary and we're going to be finding a way to get somebody else ready in the waiting. This is also complicated procedurally by the unwillingness of some of these younger whippersnappers, according to my colleague, to step up and be seen as disloyal. Remember, they're already being accused of hanging around a little too often because they're ready in the waiting. But if President Biden were to with Jill, talk with his family, talk with his advisors, and decide to voluntarily step down, there's a much easier procedure at the convention.
All right. So, Richard, seems like you agree with Wendy that this can only happen if Biden agrees to step aside. There's no way to force him out, or is there?
No, that's actually right. He cannot be forced out. But if his advisors...
They can't swap their votes. I mean, you've got the super delegates, you've got that aren't actually allocated. There is no actual way to force him out at the convention if he says, I'm sticking this through.
There is no way to force him out. And what would happen is if he does decide to, if he says, you know what, I'm stepping back, then it would be, well, who do you want? And so he would probably have a nice hand. It'd be a truly a political process between all the delegates to see who gets the most, who can win the nomination. But he would have a strong say in who would be the next potential Democratic candidate. But yes, you can't just swap him out for somebody else.
Okay, so Wendy, assuming he feels some pressure from within the Democratic camp, and as I said, we've got insiders, mega donors starting to feel a bit anxious following that performance. Maybe they'll be edging him out, assuming he can be coerced out. What happens then? What does that look like?
Well, they would need to find a replacement. And this is part of the conversation that began last night. It began actually after the first 10 minutes of the debate. But remember, I like what Richard said about the concession that Joe Biden would have to make. Nobody wanted to see that performance. And, you know, I'm even going to say on both sides of the aisle, nobody wants to see a former president embarrassed. I mean, he's aging. He had a tough time. That's going to happen to all of us at some point. So everyone sort of feels for President Biden. And one of the reasons everyone would like to see him involved in the process, if it comes to that point, of selecting a replacement. Now, you saw Gavin Newsom at the convention, at the debate last night, and he was very vocal and very animated and made it very clear afterwards that he's playing the long game. I'm paraphrasing. That's not exactly the way he put it, but he's a 2028 candidate. It would need to be with President Biden's blessing to sort of move him to the front of the pack. And also remember, Kamala Harris did the media circuit last night as well. She has arguably been closest to President Biden over the last 4 years. So she would be the likely front runner, particularly so, given that she was right out there at his side, standing up for him last night, even before he seemed to regain a little bit of ground today at his first rally, where he's over his cold, apparently. His voice was back. But President Biden would have to be the one very seriously involved in selecting a replacement.
Yeah, the Biden campaign claiming that the president's voice sounded so weak and raspy because he had a cold. And to your point, Wendy, it was painful to watch at times. It was quite literally cringe-inducing at times, feeling quite bad to see, you know, the president of the United States not really being able to muster up the stamina. But Wendy, assuming there is this graceful exit and President Biden gets to tap someone, how does that work in terms of, you know, acknowledging the Democratic voters? Is there a process that the delegates then need to vote on the candidate selected by President Biden? Talk us through the logistics there.
The logistics would involve the delegates at the convention basically selecting voting for the replacement. And this would largely be done behind the scenes beforehand. And part of the reason for that is you make a good point about what are the voters going to think about it. Many of the voters that were polled immediately after the debate, and this is no secret, this is what voters have been saying for quite a long time, over the course of the last year, particularly, especially when that race became close between Trump and Biden, is they're going to want somebody who's going to advance all of President Biden's policies, but also be able to run the country, to be able to make the tough decisions, have the stamina, and have a position of strength. You know, the president is kind of an avatar of us, is we want to be proud that we're actually leading with power. And that was one of the greatest game changers last night. You were looking at vigorous versus vulnerable. You were looking at somebody that has the strength and the stamina to carry the ball forward in former President Trump versus somebody that was halting and really, you know, I use the term weak only to showcase the fact that that was the condition last night. I don't know that he's always feeling that way, or that that would be the way he would govern for the next 4 years. But the voters are going to have to coalesce behind a candidate who shares their policies, but also has that sense of power to move the ball forward. And that's why I think the point is well taken that it would definitely need to be somebody younger.
All right. So, Richard, some have said that it wasn't that Trump had such a stellar performance. It was just in contrast to President Biden. So what would be the way, again, let's get your take on how this plays out if Biden agrees to step aside graciously. Who are the likely people that he could tap for the job? How do you then get rid of that awkward scenario where the vice president doesn't get his endorsement unless you think that she is the person that he'd tap to replace him? And again, give us the actual process of what this means at the Democratic convention, how that plays out.
So the process is very simple. In every state, Biden won the state. So the delegates actually are his delegates. But if he says, I'm no longer there, then they're free to cast a vote for somebody else. And they would most likely listen to Biden. I agree with you that Kamala Harris is probably right up there if he decides not to run. I think she's going to have a harder time to win than other candidates. I think Gavin Newsom would be a very strong candidate against Donald Trump. Bernie Sanders is always in the background. I think he would have a difficult time, which what Biden has to do if he decides to bow out is find somebody who's centrist. Bernie isn't centrist. Kamala's not centrist. Someone like a Gavin Newsom, somebody like an Amy Klobuchar, somebody who can actually capture all those people that just don't want Biden or Trump. It's really, it always boils down to a handful of states. This time it's 5 in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, etc. And if he picks someone who is a centrist Democrat like he is, then that person will have all of a sudden it will flip the entire scenario. So what'll happen before, as Wendy said, before the actual, at a caucus, essentially, before the convention, Biden will say, listen, if I want to step down, who would I want to be the candidate? And presumably whoever he would want to be the candidate would get the nomination.
Okay, so Wendy, I know we have to let you go here. Just final thoughts on this, and just to clear this up for our viewers. Biden can say, I want Gavin Newsom, for argument's sake. I want Michelle Obama, for argument's sake, one of the names that have been floated out there. And then the delegates allocated to him vote on those names, or they kind of have to go with what he says?
Well, they don't have to go with what he says, but they will as a practical matter. And that's one of the things about politics. As politics they have rules. These conventions have rules. But there's not the same type of legal obligations that we see in other areas of business. So while they would be technically legally free to cast their vote elsewhere, it'll already be pre-decided, because you know what? That's in the best party. And that's one of the reasons, they meet on Fridays and they're meeting today. They're going to have a little bit of a different conversation if, in fact, they end up having to select somebody new. But you know what they're going to do right now, Michelle? They're going to see how this all plays out. They're analyzing fallout right now. Joe Biden wanted to build back better. Now he has to beat back bias. And that means implicit bias, that although age may be just a number, the performance last night showcased that it may be more significant of a number for him.
All right. So, Wendy, final thoughts before we let you go. Do you think Biden remains as the presidential candidate?
I think he remains for now. And I think if he can redeem himself at some of these events coming up, like he already has begun to do, I understand it's different. Anybody can read off a prompter. I think they're going to give him another shot, but I think that is going to last only for a certain period of time. I hope you have me back on and ask in 2 weeks, because I think we may have a much better opportunity to decide whether or not the party is going to allow him to stay, or try to get him to leave graciously instead of being embarrassed again. That's a big deal.
All right, Wendy Patrick, good to see you. Thank you so much. Bob, I'm going to throw it over to you. In terms of the Democrats that have been floated out there, who do you think would potentially have the best shot at defeating former President Trump?
Well, I think that the popular choice is Gavin Newsom, and I'm not sure if Michelle Obama wants to be in the race, if she wants to do it. I don't think there's any two candidates that I'm aware of that would beat Trump at this particular point. I'm sure there are, but I don't know any off the top of my head that would beat it. I think the most logical choice would be Gavin Newsom if they go that route. But I still don't believe that President Biden is going to relinquish his power and let them have the delegates back.
California Governor Gavin Newsom, Bubba, has arguably not done such a great job in his state. I mean, wouldn't that be one of the pushbacks against him if you kind of look at...
He's done a horrible job, but so did President Biden in his past political career. We're not a country that really looks at what they have done. It's more of a popularity contest, or in this case, or in the last election, it was against President Trump, not who was the better candidate. It's against somebody. And that's a lot of things that we've seen. I mean, Newsom has destroyed California. He has made it from the biggest wealth disparity in the entire United States, from rich to poor. So again, he's not a very good guy, but again, he's a handsome guy. He's a popular guy. And for whatever reason, I don't know.
Mike Lee, who do you think the Democrats would field who may have the best chance at beating former President Trump?
Yeah, look, I think the reason why you're not seeing a candidate right away is because it goes from bad to worse with Biden in the process of switching out. So if Biden were to step down, it creates a very ugly scenario. So, I mean, you can go through them one by one. So the first would be Kamala, because all the money that's in the Biden-Harris presidential campaign coffers has to stay there. Right. So Kamala would have an instantaneous money advantage for president. So if it was Gavin, he would have to go out and raise all sorts of new money in a very short period of time. But you have to ask yourself, the election is decided by white working class people with less than a college education in a handful of states. So who appeals to that crowd? That's why, being dismissive of Bernie and the populist message that he's had in the past for the working class, that RFK has tried to tap into that. None of these candidates that are on the left can really reach that kind of populist working class people, which is where this election is going to be decided. So if you look at people who have never voted before, like Trump is winning that demographic by 20%. And when you look at unregistered voters, who their voting preference is, again, it's Trump by 20%. And it's the lived experience under, pre-COVID, what life was like versus anything really else other than, my take is more inflation and the cost of living, because the lower you go down the income stratosphere, the more inflation is devastating to you. And wages for that segment of the population simply haven't kept up. So, you got to ask yourself, what's the risk reward for Gavin Newsom here about stepping in? If he gets in right here and he can't pull it off, is he really teed up for 2028, or does that handicap him in losing this race? Whereas this is Kamala Harris's last chance to run for president. Maybe an Elizabeth Warren tries to throw her hat in the ring here because she's kind of out of favor. So, because there's no guarantee that a Democrat who came in here, even if it was the savior, that they would be able to pull this off in this amount of time frame. So, what's in it for them if they lose? So it's look, I don't know that they replace Joe Biden unless somebody comes along. And I don't think Michelle Obama's ever going to run for office. I think she likes being popular. And if she were to run, half the country's going to hate her. Especially with all her anti-American sentiment that nobody talks about prior to her husband becoming president, and a lot of nasty things she said about people. It's just, Donald Trump was one of the most popular people in the country. In the world, and is with the sky high favorability rating until he ran for president. I don't know that Michelle Obama is up for that. So again, I don't know what they're going to do here. If this debacle of a debate didn't happen last night, Trump is up by 4 points, in national polling. where Biden needs to win by 4 to win the Electoral College, just the way the population is spread out in this country. So look, this is a bad situation for Democrats going into this race, and I think it's just everything got exponentially worse for them. And you got Richard could probably chime in on this, but you got this the obstructing the Enron ruling this morning that can't be used for people on January 6th, and then we're probably going to get a similar presidential immunity ruling on Monday, which makes all these cases disappear. So the lawfare has failed. The quality of life, again, for the white working class across the Midwest has been devastated. And then, that is what is, in my opinion, and from what I'm reading, is going to decide this election. And if you think about Joe Biden going back, 20, 30 years ago, that kind of Scranton Joe, Union Joe, whether or not he delivered for that voting bloc, that was his brand, right? That's what he was all about. And there's a lot of people, 50s, 60s, 70s, that aren't necessarily stupid, but just don't follow politics closely. We're like, I've had enough of this Trump guy. I'm going to give Joe Biden a shot. I always kind of liked him. That has gone in reverse on double time. So look, you're now at, Trump is like a 65 to 67 cents on Predicted and Polymarket, which is an astronomically high number this far out from November.
Right. Now, Bubba, Mike makes a lot of points there. He obviously touched on the economy. That has been a central issue for voters. It seems, obviously, that came up in the debate as well. Do you think, Bubba, that former President Trump did a strong enough job during that debate in making the case why he would be better for the U.S. economy?
Well, I think that he did a good job as president the last time. And I think that you see the damage that has been done to the average, the middle class and below are in a recession as far as I'm concerned right now. And of course, you can't make enough money to pay for the bills that you have to pay for, the cost of gas, the cost of food. It doesn't affect those who have money, but those who don't, it has a major effect on what's going on. And I think that President Trump's economic policies were much better than President Biden's. I don't think if President Trump is president, we're in Ukraine feeding billions of dollars to Ukraine, letting the politicians wash through so they can get their payoffs out of those things. So I think that for the economy, for everybody, I think President Trump is a much better choice for what's going on, because I think that he understood the working class, which is why when he was president, minority jobs were at the highest level in history. We have a problem now. Since 2021, 66% of the jobs that have been created have been taken by illegal immigrants. Only 33% have gone to Americans, and 50% of the jobs have gone to government. This is not how you run a country. Okay, this is not how you prosper a country. All they're really doing is stamping down on people and taking away the opportunity of capitalism, which is one of the biggest problems that I have with this entire administration that's in place right now, is the fact that they've taken away capitalism for most people. There won't be any more Stephen Jobs or Jeff Bezos under the current administration.
Well, that was one of the points that President Biden made, is that he wants to tax the billionaires. He wants to tax the mega rich to make more provisions for the rest of the American economy, as he put it. Let's play some of the highlights in terms of the economy that was discussed during the debate, and I want to get your thoughts on the other side.
He caused the inflation, and it's killing black families and Hispanic families.
There was no inflation when I became president. You know why? The economy was flat on its back. 15% unemployment. He decimated the economy.
He has not done a good job. He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country. It is absolutely killing us. He also said he inherited 9% inflation. No, he inherited almost no inflation, and it stayed that way for 14 months, and then it blew up under his leadership.
We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out the position where we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs, but there's more to be done. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. The combination, what I was left with in corporate greed, is the reason why we're in this problem right now.
All right, let's bring back Richard Roth. Richard, the two presidents saying that they did a better job on the economy. You know, when you look at the numbers, we do have a major issue with inflation, but you can't argue that, you know, stock markets are at all-time highs. But yet often on Kitco News, we've made the point, our guests have made the point that while it may look on the surface as though the economy is doing well, that there's never been a bigger disconnection between Main Street and Wall Street. So who do you think managed to make a better point on their ability to handle the economy?
So here's the problem with both their arguments. Inflation is not an American issue. It is not a Biden issue. It is not a Trump issue. It is a worldwide issue. Inflation has been rampant in Germany, in London, in you name the city, you name the country. It is not something that was created here. So when they both start jumping on the other one on inflation, the answer to that is no. Inflation is a worldwide issue. That being said, I sort of cut out, and I'm glad I cut out, but let's just talk about the Biden administration. The biggest infrastructure bill in the history of the nation. Unemployment at an all-time low. Black unemployment at an all-time low. They have the medical benefits legislation has been phenomenal. He's got a microchip legislation that was good. The Gun Safety Act that went well. Inflation is coming down. It has been bad. It's been bad worldwide, but it's coming down. I could go on and on and on. I mean, there's been more legislation passed in the first 2 years of the Biden administration than in any sitting president until Ronald Reagan. So you can talk about inflation. You can talk about different things. And I know Michelle and you and I don't necessarily agree on all this stuff. But the bottom line is that this last administration had more, as a matter of fact, I see Bubba laughing, had more legislation passed than any president since Ronald Reagan. So it's difficult. I mean, the problem with Joe Biden right now, a president has to do two things: make decisions and communicate. The decisions, from my perspective, although the other three of you may not agree, have been fine. The problem with Joe Biden right now is that he's not able to communicate. I listened to Donald Trump yesterday say that the Democrats are killing babies after they're out of the womb. Where does he get that from? So you have dementia.
He gets that from Ralph Northam saying it.
What?
He gets that from Ralph Northam saying it, who was the former governor of Virginia, saying it verbatim. That's where that came from.
Well, all right, we'll let Richard finish his point, and then I know Mike and Bubba want to chime in.
I guess the better way to say it is we have maybe senile versus denial. I mean, Donald Trump, every time Donald Trump has someone up against him, they cheat. They're wrong. It's a witch hunt. He's got 4 jurisdictions with four different prosecutors, with 4 grand juries, with 4 juries, one of which has convicted him. So he's a convicted felon. You can blame the system. That's what he does. But the bottom line is that, do we want someone who's a better decision maker, which I submit is Joe Biden? None of you will agree with that. Or do we want, but the problem with Joe Biden right now is he's having major problem communicating. And that's a big problem for a president. I will give you that.
All right, we're going to take Biden's cognitive ability and the questions out of that for right now in terms of decision making. But Bubba, you were shaking your head when Richard was listing some of what he says are the tremendous accomplishments of the Biden administration with regards to passing legislation, with regards to the economy, with regards to unemployment. So give us your take in response to what we heard from Richard.
Well, I think he's done a pretty poor job. I think that they've given China way too much power. I mean, China has been accumulating farmland in the United States, and they've now bought farmland near 19 U.S. air bases. I think that, those who control the food control the world. And you can see what's going on in the farming community. The grain prices are getting crushed. And I think that is partially or all due to China, because I think they're trying to force farmers to sell their land, which means they can take the food supply. Remember, everybody knows and has heard the story of the 100-year plan by China. And to me, it's looking like President Biden has helped them accelerate their plan, and maybe it'll take over the world in 50 years, and it will be the CCP of the United States of America, because the billionaire tax that they want to put on rich people, it makes no sense, because, of course, fix the tax code if you want to get the right amount of taxes, but yet he has made legislation and things to help Google and Meta and Amazon and to destroy the ability for a small business to make it in this country anymore. You can't start from a small business anymore and get to the size of a Amazon or a Google anymore. Those opportunities are long gone and have left the building. The fact that we are buying gas from Saudi Arabia versus drilling our own, and the fact that our strategic petroleum supply has got about a 14-day supply, which is wartime oil. I think those are all flaws of this administration. And again, he's got to fight with the squad as well, which is another problem and another story for another day.
Rich, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to Bubba, and then we'll get Mike's take.
I'm sorry, you want me to respond to that?
Richard, we're going to give you a chance to respond to Bubba there. So we don't have 2-on-1 here, because I have a feeling Mike may agree with Bubba.
So I guess the whole mantra is doom and gloom. And that's what Trump's mantra is, how horrific it is living in this country and how terrible we are. In the meantime, leave aside the immigration issue, because I do think that's a big problem with Joe Biden. I think that he's failed miserably with that, and Bubba will agree with that. Leave aside that issue. We are all flourishing. We are doing well. The market is on a ride. Unemployment is low. Salaries are actually outpacing the rate of inflation. As far as China buying up our property goes, I'm a little bit naive on that issue. I don't know about it. I've not read about it. I'm pretty good on reading what happens. Maybe that was on Newsmax and I didn't see it. But I will submit to you that the country is doing better, notwithstanding inflation, and taking aside the immigration issue, because the border is a big problem for Joe Biden, that it was 4 years ago.
All right, the border is a big problem. Many would say that the geopolitical situation across the globe would have been different under President Trump. But one thing we all know is you go to the grocery store and your bill is higher. Now, Richard was making the point that inflation is not a U.S. problem. It's a worldwide problem, and therefore we can't blame President Biden or the Biden administration for that. Let's focus on the economy and inflation and your thoughts regarding what Richard said there.
Yeah, so look, we are in a really peculiar economy in that we have this AI thing going on in the stock market that has just been awesome, right? But it's, the 7 stock leadership last year is consolidated to 5 stock leadership because you have a narrow participation in this economy. Inflation in the rest of the world is not a driving factor, either positive or negative, to the inflation here. Much of the inflation here is from this legislation, plus and but more so from regulation and energy policy. Biden's one of his first acts as soon as he walked into office was getting rid of the Keystone pipelines, and you have people of his party, of his similar mindset, telling fossil fuel companies, we want to put you out of business. So there's no new investment into expanding the energy infrastructure in the U.S. unless it's green energy through the infrastructure bill, which Richard brought up. That same infrastructure bill that has bought us 8 charging stations for a total of $8 billion. The problem is these legislative accomplishments are accomplishments for Washington, D.C., and not for America. And it's hard for a lot of Democrats to understand this, because when they were talking about a lot of similar policies under Barack Obama, they seem to go over well. And Richard is 100% right when you have you've passed significant legislation, but you have a communication problem. The thing is Barack Obama's meat and potatoes policy were some of the most unpopular things that have ever came across this country. So Obamacare, up until the House Republicans and the Senate Republicans kind of blew up reforming it, was the least popular legislation in since Prohibition. However, Barack Obama himself is a dynamic politician. He is a likable guy. He is a really effective communicator. So you could get bad policy over the plate with a really effective leader. And so with Joe Biden and basically almost every other Democrat, because there's only one Barack Obama, these things are horrifically unpopular. And this infrastructure, there's no real multiplier to the economy. And green energy, which is like one of the signature policy, points of this administration through both the regulatory legislative act and executive action acts, is devastating to the auto industry, because with an electric car, you make, they cost like a third to make. They use 30% less hours for the auto workers, and no one really wants an electric car that's not a Tesla. So you have the auto companies that are going to push themselves in Detroit into bankruptcy to try to meet these demands for cars that no one wants. So, Trump has moved dramatically in Michigan based on those specifically policy points alone. And when you add, and in the CHIPS Act, the CHIPS Act is going nowhere because you need to hire construction companies that have a certain number of trainees and women and this minority and that minority. So this overreaching, overlaying architecture regulation coming from the Department of Labor that's attached to all these appropriation bills has just made all of this legislation wildly inflationary. Okay. And like we can talk, and now when you pass the second and third COVID stimulus bill, which happened under Joe Biden, and you extended those unemployment benefits, you put so much money in the economy unnecessarily to kind of juice it up. That's what started the wave of inflation in the U.S. And they've done similar stupid things overseas, but it has nothing to do with what's going on here. The helicopter money was wildly inflationary, and when you combine that with doubling the cost of energy, a massive amount of regulation, you can point directly at this administration for ruining the quality of life for those in the bottom half, bottom 2/3 of this country. And again, it is white working class that do not pay close attention to politics that will decide this election across the Midwest. And those are the people whose lives have been harmed the most since the beginning of COVID.
All right, Mike, you said there's only one Barack Obama, but there is a Michelle Obama, and she has been floated as a possible potential replacement for President Biden should he step aside. So let's bring it back to that topic, the central topic of our conversation here. Richard, I do want to throw it back to you because we did hear from former Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, who has said that this is potentially by design. This is not the first time he's made this comment, but most recently he said that there's long been speculation that this has been the plan all along. He told Fox News that he believes the other side knows what it's doing. If they're swapping another nominee in August, that is the best case scenario for them because you get the honeymoon period with a new candidate without the scrutiny that comes with it. This is the earliest presidential debate in American history, and it's taking place before the nominating convention of either party. So why did the Democrats make that as one of the conditions to have the debate this early? Again, when he was on the stage during the Republican debates, Vivek Ramaswamy made a similar point saying, we know it's not going to be Joe Biden, so just let us know who it is. It is going to be Michelle Obama. Is it going to be Gavin Newsom? So there has been this speculation that this has been the plan all along, that this is by design. And you throw in the fact that, yeah, it is pretty unusual that you have a debate this early on in the election season. So what do you say to that, Richard?
So it is. I agree with you. It is unusual to have the early debate. However, if this conspiracy theory is sort of like the Kennedy theory. If you think for a second that Joe Biden wanted to get on a stage in front of a national audience and look the way he did, then you're fooling someone. This was not a Joe Biden intentional mess up.
Not a Joe Biden, but perhaps the Democratic Party.
To your point, I think that there is clearly concern about Joe Biden at his age. And so I don't know if it necessarily is a strategy of the Democrats, but I do believe the Democrats wanted it early because if there is an issue, and we didn't think there would be, the State of the Union, he was dead on. He was wonderful. But if there is an issue, we want to nip it earlier than later. And quite frankly, it's a smart strategy when you have an 82-year-old man running for president. So I don't think that it's a strategy to get rid of him. I think the strategy is let's see how he does. And if Trump falls for having an early debate, which he did, then all the better, because the earlier we can swap him out, the better. I do believe that if any of those candidates come in, then I think this will be it'll be a very, very different election. A lot of people don't want either of them. So whether it's Michelle Obama, whether it's Gavin Newsom, I think the progressives are going to have a problem because a lot of middle of the road people are just not going to vote for the progressives. But I do think that the strategy is not necessarily to get rid of them, but to sort of test the waters, because we do have a very aging president. And if we think we want to get rid of him, we better do it before August. So I don't think it was planned. I think it was thoughtful. This is really the thought. If in fact he's that bad, then maybe we want to do it. But remember, you still need Joe Biden to agree to it. And I don't know if Joe Biden, who's been in office for a long time, is going to say, fine, I'm stepping down. I'll admit I can't do it. I don't think it's happening.
They took a free screen test. They took a shot to see what would happen. And if it doesn't work out now, they can start working on trying to get him out.
I don't disagree with that. But to say to Joe Biden, we want you to step aside, that's a big thing. You think if someone said to Donald Trump, you're 78 years old, and I know he doesn't have the cognitive issues, you think he would step aside? I mean, when you reach that,
his problem is that he couldn't keep his mouth shut in the first place. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the issues we have today.
Well, but Richard Ramaswamy.
You and I agree on more things than not. What?
We love agreement. We love disagreement. We love opinions here. But Richard Ramaswamy's point was that this was the plan because it doesn't really buy time for Trump to challenge another candidate. You know, it's a limited time. You're in the honeymoon phase, as Vivek Ramaswamy said it. And look, we've had other guests on the show that were saying there's no way come November that this is going to be Trump versus Biden in a traditional election cycle. And arguably, it's already not been traditional by virtue of the fact that we do have a convicted felon as one of the candidates, and that what many have said has been the weaponization of the justice system against former President Trump. But you're saying thoughtful, but not planned. Is there really a difference?
Oh, there's absolutely a difference. Because if Joe Biden kicked butt yesterday, which all the Democrats were hoping, then they would say, go, Joe. They wanted the Joe who was at the State of the Union last month or 2 months ago.
We wouldn't be here if he had a good night last night.
Strong. Joe Biden yesterday was lost. And I think that when I say thoughtful, they're not saying put him up there and make him into a rag doll. But if he starts failing, and there's some indication he's failing, then we'd rather know earlier than later. And I think that that's smart. I don't think it's a plan. I think if Joe Biden did well yesterday, and no Democrat thought he was going to do as poorly as he did. I mean, he was poor. And so I think that now, Vivek can prognosticate as much as he wants. But the bottom line is that I think it was a smart thing to do when you have an 82-year-old candidate, get him up there early and see how he can handle it.
All right, so let's bring it back to the markets. Mike, reaction to the debate on the market was pretty mute. I mean, we have the leader of the free world looking, and I think it's safe to say, frail and weak. And that's, I think, a group opinion at this point, right? And yet we didn't really see much movement in terms of equity markets. We didn't see much movement in terms of the dollar. We didn't see much movement in terms of safe haven assets like gold and arguably Bitcoin. For those that view Bitcoin as a safe haven asset, gold did move a little bit, but more on that inflation data and the increased possibility of potential cuts. But what do you make of the fact that, here we have the leader of the free world looking definitely not strong, and there wasn't any kind of market reaction? Did that surprise you?
No, because like I said before, Trump had a somewhat commanding lead going into this. And that's not me. That's like Nate Silver. And, I have a friend, he used to run trading at one of the largest firms in the world. He's moving more to the right, but, basically a lifelong Democrat. In his mind, from a pure investment standpoint, there was no way Biden was going to win this. And now we're on the other side of this. I think, and then so if we look at this going forward, if for some reason the Democrats win, I think that we get more of the same in the market. It's going to be hard to get inflation down to 2% without a recession. And with the government spending that we're seeing, and we're not going to get a recession, but we're not going to get lower inflation. So we're going to have this concentrated leadership with these AI names just continuing to dominate, because that trend's going to transcend politics beyond that. And then, if Trump does win, you see the price of energy collapse. You see a massive regulatory change, especially with the Chevron decision today. Like a real kind of animal spirits come in. And so this market rally broaden out, and rates come down, especially on the front end, as inflation subsides.
Bubba, what do you think happens if it is decided to replace Joe Biden and that becomes fact, that becomes official? What kind of market reaction do you anticipate then?
I don't think there'll be a lot of market reaction. I think, first of all, you have to recognize that 10% of the population controls the 90% of the market. And I think that the markets are on their way higher. I think we're building another massive bubble. There's a ton of warning signs out there, 600 regional banks in trouble that have admitted to being in trouble. I think we're over leveraged. Our consumer is overspent. Credit card debt is at all-time highs. And I'm not talking about dollars, because dollars are dollars, but there are more people that limit on their credit card than ever in history before. So I don't think that the markets are going to continue to go as long as the hope for more Fed money or lower interest rates is in play. And I think that that's probably a false hope at this point, because, again, if we talk about inflation, you're not going to get inflation down if you cut rates. You're going to have to hike rates again. And I would generally say that the lower half of America is already in a recession, if not a little bit higher than that. And I think that there's a lot of issues here that we always continue to ignore. And this is very similar to the 90s and the internet bubble. And this is very similar to the 08 housing bubble. And I'm already seeing it with housing, with mortgage rates at 7 and 8%, that housing is slowing down. And I don't think we get an accurate account of what numbers are. And a lot of the inflation is caused by too many government jobs. The federal government is way too big and is never meant to, according to what the Constitution has written. So I think that a new candidate is not going to really affect these markets as it stands right now.
But Bubba, just to push back on that, markets hate uncertainty, right? So now there's a little bit of potential uncertainty. If it does look like there'll be a candidate swap, does that maybe make the Fed's movements a bit more difficult? Does it make it look even more political if the Fed then goes ahead and cuts rates?
Well, I think...
Go on.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Finish your question.
Well, the question is, does this perhaps create a bigger sense of chaos, more uncertainty, makes things more challenging for the Fed, and sort of start to erode investor confidence when there is this shakiness, this uncertainty?
Well, I think the Fed doesn't do a good job, so I don't think that they'll change their way of doing things. I mean, I don't think interest rates should be where they are now. I think they should still be higher yet, because, of course, they don't understand that if they would let the free market trade the rate market, you would find out that interest rates can survive at a higher rate. And all you have to do is look at the peer-to-peer lenders like Prosper Capital and those. They're getting 12 and 13% and are packed with people coming in to borrow. So, again, I think the Federal Reserve is overplayed their hand and really done a good job of destroying the U.S. dollar and destroying our economy, creating a lot of this inflation with, as Michael said, the helicopter money. The whole process of what the Fed does is wrong, and they're really more into keeping things under control, because our currency system, the fiat currency system, is all manipulated by the different central banking systems around the globe. So what the Fed does is what the Fed does. But right now, the markets are still hoping for a 0.25% rate cut rate in July, where they were originally looking for 5 rate cuts. But there's so many warning signs that the Fed really can't. Banks in trouble. The bigger banks are over leveraged. You've got too much debt. You've got an amazing amount of federal debt. And of course, we keep hiring more people, which puts a bigger burden on the taxpayer. So all of those things are what's affecting the market. But yet we still have markets love money, and they're going to keep pushing them because there's nowhere else to go right now.
Bubba, what about, you mentioned fiat currency, de-dollarization, lack of faith in the U.S. dollar. As we know, the U.S. dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States. If there is this kind of shakeup, does that perhaps increase the likelihood of people losing faith in the dollar? Does that increase the interest in gold as a safe haven asset? Does this sort of further create the case that the United States perhaps is not that, shining beacon on the hill and that things are not as sound as the US may appear that they could be. Does this mean anything for the dollar? Does this mean anything for the de-dollarization? Does this mean anything for gold?
I think it means more for the effort to get to the digital currency, okay, where they can then track you from the time you're born to the time you die. I think this is more of the issue. I think this is more of the globalization that this particular administration is trying to instill into a socialism type of environment. And again, the dollar is going to be the reserve currency for as far as I can see into the future. Eventually that could change, but there is still no country that has the ability or the chance to be as strong as we are if we do things right. And for many years, and Richard mentioned this earlier, the infrastructure bill might have been there, but every president since I've been voting, and that's voting since 1978, every president has promised to fix the infrastructure. So far, zero have done so. Okay. Zero have made a major effect on the overall infrastructure. So we've got so many problems, but we are still the one nation that can still pull it together if we get our thing out of our, and we can really put this back on the map. But right now we're extremely weak, but it's not going to affect the US dollar at this point in time, in my opinion.
Okay. So swapping out a candidate doesn't impact the dollar, and whether it's Biden or Trump, that makes no difference. Mike, a Trump victory versus a Biden victory or a Democratic victory, what would the market prefer?
So Michelle, I'll just say for Biden to not be the candidate, as Richard was touching on earlier, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities they force him out, but that would be extraordinarily ugly. And so that sort of ugliness just turns your low propensity voter off, which in my opinion are what drives elections. Who can get these people out to the polls? And so it's just not going to be a good look to force him out in some kind of big drama. So if Joe Biden doesn't step aside, like it's going to be, either the Democrats are stuck with him. It's hard for me to foresee that they're not going to be there. So if you start thinking about where the dollar is going to be with Joe Biden, look, we're creating a new $1 trillion of debt every 100 days, and this is with a Republican House, very small majority. And you'd imagine if the Democrats win, they probably carry both chambers. Because maybe the Republicans can eke out a 1-vote lead in the Senate, just because they've got some favorable matchups coming up in the next election. But it'd be hard. I'd be hard pressed to see the Republicans hold the House if the Democrats pull this off. So again, I think you see more of the same, where government spending kind of papers over a lot of the problems in the overall economy as this the Inflation Reduction Act, which has reduced inflation the same way the Affordable Care Act has has increased the affordability of healthcare. You're going to see persistently high inflation, and then interest rates elevated. Maybe Powell cuts 25 or 50 basis points to get in good favor of Washington, but nothing to really make a dent in it. With that persistently high inflation, we are going to, higher interest rates. But above all else, tech is going to be rewarded. So I think, the safe bet, if you're unsure about who's going to win, you want to own the big technology names, your Microsofts, your Googles, not necessarily NVIDIA. Now that the stock has, up 750% in the last 18 months, but Microsoft and Google, Amazon. On these names, their cloud computing, what's going on with artificial intelligence. That to me is your safe haven. It'll be interesting to see if the Democrats win, if they reverse course on crypto, where I'm a huge crypto bull at the moment. I'm a huge gold bull at the moment, because regardless of who wins, we have this debt morass that's going to hang around the neck of our country in perpetuity. And the only way out of almost all these problems is printing more money, which is kind of what the Fed has a track record of doing. In a Trump victory, though, I would not want to own energy, because you're going to see energy policy change dramatically. It's kind of it's just kind of wild thinking that energy stocks would do so much better under a Democrat than under under Republican, but you're going to see a lot more supply come to market, a lot less regulation. So with that, you'll probably see energy stocks correct. On the flip side, with the Democrat victory, you'll see an elevated value with an elevated energy prices, and these companies, focused on increasing shareholder value, returning capital to shareholders versus making investments in new projects. So that's kind of the way I see things. I think it's, a Democrat victory is more bullish for gold than a Republican victory. But, we've spoke about this at length. I think gold's on a one-way ticket to 5,000 after the last breakout. I think 200,000 is the next stop for Bitcoin.
Wow, 200,000 for Bitcoin, 5,000 for gold. Bubba, to Mike's point, President Trump has come out very aggressively pro-Bitcoin, saying that he fully supports Bitcoin, saying that he would keep Joe Biden's anti-crypto army at bay, saying that he's accepting donations in Bitcoin. As we wrap up here, Bubba, do you change your portfolio allocation in any way in light of this development? Do you allocate things a little bit differently closer to the election? What are your investment thoughts right now?
Well, I think that you have to be concerned about the overall market, but I think that everybody should have some representation of some gold, silver, whatever, some metals, some hard assets, that not the paper hard assets, but hard assets that you put in your safe, because you could need that as real money at some point in time. And I think Bitcoin in the top crypto world is really good too. I think it's I'm not as unfortunate as Michael of getting in early enough, but I believe in it. I think that it's decentralized, which takes government out of play. And I think that people are starting to recognize that. And I think those that are younger that understand technology realize that that's a great payment way and a great way as stored assets, although you're storing assets on a computer or on a flash drive, versus, putting them in a safe. But I do think that people should have some exposure to that as well, because again, if we do go into another major meltdown, which I believe we will see at some point, then you're going to want to have some assets that you can go to start to accumulate the assets that are going to be on sale, which is the old story. That is why the rich always get richer, is because they have capital to buy when markets start to break down.
All right. Richard Roth, we're going to give you the final word here.
Well, I really can't tell you what to invest in. I listen to these guys. It's going to be interesting. I do think that, to Mike's point, that if the Democrats do decide to essentially politely force Joe Biden out, I hope that it is done, and I think it will be done behind the scenes, because I do think Mike is right. You don't want the president of the United States to be looked at as a weak person, and you don't want the process to fail. So hopefully, if that happens, I think that would be the way it happens. But it's going to be an interesting road. I mean, we have two candidates who the majority of the populace does not want to be the next president. So we'll see. It's who do you dislike more? And as I said earlier, it doesn't really matter in New York where I am. It doesn't really matter in Florida. It doesn't really matter in Las Vegas. It matters in those states, maybe Las Vegas a little more so. So we're going to see. We're going to see what happens in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and that will determine who the next president will be.
All right. Exciting and interesting times. And we appreciate all of you joining us on a Friday afternoon to give us your analysis and your insights and perspectives. So thank you again, Richard Roth, Mike Lee, and Todd Bubba Horwitz, and Wendy Patrick, who joined us earlier. A big thank you, as always, to our sponsors, Swan Bitcoin. And again, a reminder to our viewers that Swan offers an IRA product, which allows you to invest directly in Bitcoin with your IRA. There's a way to set it up that you're basically buying Bitcoin on autopilot, which then, of course, allows you to take advantage of dollar cost averaging, and you can accumulate Bitcoin into your IRA that way. There's a link in the description with a special offer for Kitco viewers to help you facilitate that process. So take a look at that. And thank you again for watching. For me, Michelle Makori, and the rest of the team, we'll see you next time.
On the Spot with Michelle Makori is brought to you by Swan Bitcoin. Swan Bitcoin IRA. Your legacy, your way. Real Bitcoin, not proxies. Traditional and Roth IRAs. Fast, easy setup. Start now at swan.com/retire.